we're saying hello now to Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiner to talk about the weekend's Gaelic football action. Great of Mayo to voluntarily be the guinea pigs when it comes to, is it better to go out of the championship early in the provincial championship and have that extra time to prepare for the round robin? We're going to find out.
Exactly, yeah. I think the bar, the last time I spoke to you, Ger, we said the bar was just, please don't be boring. And Mayo skipped over that bar very happily. I think just one thing on that, right? I think it has been, and I know I'm kind of on an island about this, I don't think it's insignificant to be a third seed, the more I look at it. Just from I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world by any stretch of imagination, but if you're the third seed, it means you're guaranteed to, I don't know if people understand this, it's been preordained, you're guaranteed to play seed 1 first. So in an ideal scenario, it would be easy to say this in hindsight, but in an ideal scenario, Mayo would end up in a group with Dublin and the Ulster runners up, and suddenly you play seed 1 first, you play seed 2 second, and that's coming off the back of a loss. That's 2 big games, and there could be a bit of jeopardy, which is what we all want out of that round robin. So I don't think it's the worst. I don't think it's an ideal scenario to be at seed 3. I also think it's the worst thing in the world, and a 6-week block now, I'm sure they have enough expertise within that coaching setup to manage that perfectly. So from their perspective, they might look at it and say, we'll be in the exact same boat as Roscommon or Galway, whoever loses that semi-final. We're all going to be third seeds, and it's not the worst thing in the world. At the same time, I wouldn't just dismiss it as being totally irrelevant either.
No, it's not ideal. I think there's no way to get into the round robin. In many ways, there's no way to get into the round robin in an ideal scenario, because you've no guarantee that your best players aren't going to get injured from the extra games, but at least they will be rested. And so just to spool out those fixtures, let's say it's the Dubs who are the Leinster champions, and let's say, is it potentially then Ulster runners up? There's still one more match for them against the 4th seed, and if they win that, they'll be through to the preliminary quarterfinals. Is that correct? Yeah,
that is correct. The only thing is, though, if you go through as a third seed, you have an away preliminary quarterfinal then.
Right.
So that preliminary, the wildcard weekend will be an away game.
Okay, against another team.
A second seed, yeah.
Okay, and the second seed will have to come through. They'll have to have survived. Okay. It'll be interesting to see how those fixtures all work out, because at the moment, the second seeds could be Clare or Tip, or it could be Louth or Meath on one side. It could be Cavan or probably Armagh.
Any number of teams in Ulster, yeah.
Yeah, just before I get a lot of angry tweets, Clare or Limerick. Limerick, obviously.
Clare, Limerick, sorry, yes.
And they'll I'm sure they'll back to themselves.
So it's my fault. So you can give out to me, not Maurice. I'm just saying, in that scenario, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for Mayo. However, if they've lost 2 games in the round robin, then I think it's very difficult to see them making a comeback from that situation. So, how do they lose this? How do they manage to get it so badly wrong? Or do we just need to say, hang on a second, this is actually all about Roscommon?
Well, I think Roscommon they're a perfect example for me of a team who know exactly what they're about. Every single player is on the same page. They know how they want to play. They're more than content, as you saw at the weekend, to drag it down into the trenches and make it kind of a really controlled, managed game. Even small stuff, like I heard you talking earlier about their game management. I thought that was particularly interesting in the first half. Just the fact that the goalkeeper was going to take his time over kickouts and didn't care if the crowd was on his back, and there were no rush to get the ball back into play, playing into that breeze. They kind of get that, they flood that 45 zone, then hit with a venom there. I thought Enda Smith, lads, was absolutely outstanding. Surprised, I have to say, when you consider that 2017, Enda Smith, you had an incredible year that year, and then Stephen Rochford was the Mayo manager, who was on the sideline again and sent Lee Keegan after him and broke Roscommon's hearts. And it just happened that the man whose heart he broke was Kevin McStay, was on the sideline for Roscommon, and they didn't seem to man-mark him at the weekend, which was interesting. But yeah, I think Roscommon, I agree with you. I think Roscommon deserve a huge amount of credit rather than Mayo going totally amiss here. They said it, as we said after the Galway League game, there was a template here, try and take away their kicking game, force them to carry the ball, seeking that work. Maybe get the rub of the green with a couple of calls within that, but by and large I think it was a well justified result for Roscommon.
Conditions notwithstanding, Maurice, I mean, it took 25 minutes for Mayo to score their first point from play, and we saw that was an issue that cropped up in the league final as well. Only 4 points from play across the match. When you look at the inside line for Mayo, Tommy Conroy and O'Donoghue, Murray and Stack picked them up and performed, I thought, brilliantly. I mentioned Brian Stack earlier as someone who stood out for me in that Roscommon defensive line. Is that a concern, that Mayo lack of scores from play? Because Davy Burke clearly said afterwards that was something they pinpointed.
Well, it was a dog of a good day for an inside forward, Shane. It's not a day where it was a defender's day, especially on a wet afternoon like that. In saying that, Tommy Conroy probably isn't fit. I thought if that early chance, they'd kind of 2 goal chances in the first 5 minutes, especially when you have a team coming like that, determined to spoil the party. The same thing could be said for Leitrim. You kind of want to put football out of their heads early, try and take those early chances, and don't give them any sense of spirit and a cause. But that obviously didn't happen. I don't know. Is it a major concern? That they do have a nice balance within there, but I do think you learn a lot more from your losses and your wins. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And there was definitely stuff that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks within Mayo that they learned from the weekend. I think they have a big problem in midfield now, and it'll be very interesting how they fix that, because they don't actually have depth there without going and plugging holes from elsewhere. You'd have to go messing with your balance of your half forward line, or I don't see them reverting to. They've got a couple of handy 20s, but I don't see them turning to that. So there's a lot of them to work. I'm not saying this result was insignificant, but that stuff, you don't take that in isolation from the weekends. That stuff come back over the last couple of weeks, and I think that forward line, if you can get Ryan O'Donoghue, Aidan O'Shea and Tommy Conroy all fit, throw Killian Conroy on top of that, I wouldn't. That's not where I'd be pointing the finger.
Is one of the potential solutions in midfield to get Conor Loftus back into midfield and maybe put somebody more defensive minded as the 6?
Potentially, yeah. I think that's an interesting. It's funny, right? Because Mayo, for all the experiment that they did, they actually kind of had their pillars and didn't do much messing around with them. Like Loftus at 6, bar Doherty played there against Monaghan, but that was kind of firmly established. I think the plan was McBrien was going to be the fullback. He obviously got pulled out before throw-in. I think their big problem, Ger, is Matt Duran's form has not been good for a while now. And I think I would have said previously he was a natural rival to Brian Fenton. I don't think that was an exaggeration in terms of his natural ball skills and his athleticism. But they lost the battle, as we mentioned, that Ennis Smith thing. They lost the battle in midfield at the weekend. They lost the battle. I talked to you about this previously after the Galway game. It was probably the only line Galway got right that day. And you go back, and this is becoming a team probably since the 2020 All-Ireland final in Croke Park, big days in Croke Park. You can go through the games in 2021 right up until the Tyrone game. Con Kilpatrick took particular joy, I think, in rubbing it in the face of then football podcast host Andy Moran that he got that battle right. You go forward a year later, even the last 2 games in 2021, Kevin Feely from Clare was man of the match that day, I think. I'm pretty sure he was against Mayo. Devin Moran probably had his best day of all last season against Mayo midfield. It's a consistent team. So I don't think anybody is. I wouldn't listen if somebody's saying he is playing well. I don't think there's any truck with that. So you've got 3 options. You can take him out of midfield and maybe play him as a half forward, try and get him back in form. You can take him out of there entirely and try and plug somebody else in there, whether that be Loftus or Jordan Flynn seems to me like a natural midfielder, and he'd be a fine partner for Jim O'Connor, who's doing that sort of defensive work. But then as you mentioned, you're plugging a hole elsewhere. Who's going to play 6? What are you going to do with your half forward line then? If you take Jack Haney out of there, do you have a natural 11? Is an option we just mentioned those 4 very talented inside forwards. Could one of them come out and play 11 like Brian O'Donoghue or Killian O'Connor? And that's a lot of reconfiguration for a team that looked to be on top of the world. So I'm not saying you tear the paper up, but they're definitely, even when they were winning, this was an issue. And I think it'll be interesting to see. What Mayo now need to think about is there's every prospect they're playing, as we mentioned, a seed one, a Dublin or a Kerry next. Now how are you gonna match up with them?
Yeah, and that's exactly that's how you get everybody back into training over the next couple of weeks, and just remind them that there is a massive opportunity for them. And ideally, that game is that game a home game or an away game? Is that designated, or is that potentially Croker?
Yes, yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think that was clarified, but okay. The honest answer is I don't know.
One of the things that we wanted to talk about was Roscommon and going long on their own kick out. There's 2 things we want to talk about Roscommon. The fact that the backdoor cut was so successful for them, which is remarkable really, considering Mayo have loads of people who can diagnose this, and maybe that's the Mayo's inexperienced in their full back line and the lack of championship minutes they had. But again, that's the type of very quick, you get blanched in boiling water, and that never happens to you again as a defence. The other thing is going along with their kickouts, high risk, high reward, and it totally worked out for them.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. After Mayo played Roscommon in Dr. Hyde Park in the league, I could see Davy Burke running around doing all his media, and we were sitting by the side of the pitch waiting for him. And eventually he came down, and I asked him, you seem to be an anomaly. You're the only team who basically go long on all your kickouts. They actually played Galway in a league game, and with 100% of their kickouts, they went long. They never once went short. And that was in, as I'm sure you know, that was in difficult conditions in Salthill, but they were just determined to do this. And he looked back at me like I was the mad one and everybody else is mad, and they should all be doing exactly what he's doing. That the only way you're going to score goals, he said, is off first phase. Your best chance of doing that is by not, if you go short, you're inevitably running a ball, and if you're running a ball, you're going to meet that, what Roscommon did, what Clare did to Cork, that kind of big body of players at the 45, and it just lessens your chance of getting goals. And Roscommon and Davy Burke seems particularly determined that they will get goals. That was the winning of the game, taking those two chances. So they just decide to go off that. Now, even if you look at it statistically, it paid off for them. I think they scored 1-3 after their kick out at the weekend. They conceded 2 points, so they're in the plus column there. Now, on the flip side of that, you'd see other teams and they get absolutely cleaned out about that, but Roscommon seem determined. Even if they don't win that ball kind of first phase, they don't have huge fetchers. They'll spoil and they'll make it really difficult. And Keith Doyle, I think, is a great find in midfield. I thought maybe missing Ultan Harney would end up costing them, but I didn't see this kid coming and being as ready for intercounty football as he has proved to have been. So while it's working to stick with it, there still is part of me that will wave around my charts and numbers and say, statistically, you kind of do need to mix it up, and there still is a place for a short kick-up. But while it's working, it's hard to refute it.
Well, I think to your point, and probably it wasn't 100% this time. So Cian Johnson was doing some stats for us. They're slightly different from yours, but not much. He had 1-4 from their own kick-out, but they had 18 kick-outs, long with 13, short with 5. Mayo had 17 kick-outs and went long with 5 and short with 12. So the almost exact inverse. And it meant that Mayo were slogging everything all day to try and get through, and the 3 or 4 times that we only need to get lucky once, they only got lucky a couple of times, and they kicked 1-3, 1-4 off that.
Yeah, and certain teams, I think this is really interesting for how you go about your championship this year, because I wouldn't say to Mayo, if you go back to what Galway did to them, for example, this was an exaggerated form of it, but I thought this was kind of typical Cian O'Neill stuff. We don't want you to go long, so we're going to concede this kick out kind of aggressively. Your full back line will be left open and will flood that midfield area. And in a situation like that, I don't think any of us would say Mayo have to go long. Like, you'd kind of be stupid to kick to where you're totally outnumbered and you have to take the short option. So in a sense, you forced their hand, because exactly, once they've kicked that ball off short, they're running the ball. You're not going to be able to get your kickbacks off, or if you do, you're kicking to where there's a lot of bodies. And that makes it difficult. And Roscommon seemed very content to play the game in that term. They actually did press on both sides of it as well. But even still, I'm getting back to this, coming back to, this is connected to my midfield issue earlier. I don't know if they have enough fetchers there that they would be able to, if you were just to lobby it out and kind of gamble, if you wanted to do that, at minimum, we're not going to concede this. I don't know if Mayo have that right, but I do appreciate that teams are going after them. They did to Kerry this year as well. They really took away their ability to go long, and they're forcing, I think teams want Mayo and Kerry, and to a certain extent Galway, to run the ball rather than the alternative where you might be more likely to carve them open.
How important is it for a team like Roscommon, Maurice, to utilise a bit of a siege mentality? Like we mentioned, Davy Burke was in studio with us a number of months ago. I was ready to run through the studio wall after he left. He's such a motivating man and such a exciting prospect in terms of GAA managers in this country. He talked about disrespect after the match, and he said that we were probably disrespected Roscommon during the week. We finished third in Division 1, and that didn't matter by all accounts. Our defensive record didn't matter. Nothing mattered. And he said, I'm sure our boys weren't overly pleased with all the talk. They clearly utilised headlines and whatever way they approached it, but that was something that clearly Davy Burke held on to.
Yeah, for the last decade we've been hearing about how high performance environments are all about intrinsic motivation and internal stuff, and you can't focus on external sources. And over again we hear people talk about how they utilise the chip in the shoulder to devastating effect. David Burke is just the latest in a long list, lads. You go back, Paddy Andrews talked about their regard for Mayo and the media darlings. Mayo I remember Conor Laverty doing the same thing after Kilcoo won there All Ireland. It seems to be a very powerful source. So I think that was, it's easy to say this in hindsight, I'm sure. I think that was very obvious in how Roscommon performed at the weekend. The way they were celebrating frees, how much the kind of bite that they bring defensively. Niall Daly, and a lot of people will focus on the Dailies and their aggression, but he's a very smart footballer too. He was kind of covering that zone, and then he'll bring that kind of war mentality that you see to everything. So they very clearly fed into it. You got that sense right talking to a couple of players after, and I think it was part of the idea that we're coming here we have a grand plan here. We're coming here to pull off a heist. And Smith actually said after the game, it's very satisfying when a plan comes off. So they clearly had a circle around this. I'm sure that stuff all fed into this idea that we're going to come and do exactly what they did 4 years ago.
Yeah, if Michael Jordan's taking stuff personally, I think the rest of the world can maybe learn a little bit about competitive spirit from him. We should briefly, and we'll get into this over the course of the rest of the week, and we get the opportunity to talk about everybody again because it's only the start of the championship. But Clare's victory over Cork is really, really significant for that Clare team, for Colm Collins, who has been slaving away for years and years and years. And at every moment, it seems like where they were just about to get this breakthrough, it didn't happen for them. And it's not over yet. They obviously still have a tricky semi-final, as we pointed out, to get through. But it's a huge, huge moment for Clare football.
Massive, yeah. And again, talking about cliches, it's become a cliche to praise Colm Collins. But if you look at what has happened here, as I mentioned earlier, I think you learn a lot more from your losses than your wins. I thought it was really interesting that Colm Collins said after the game, he was actually thinking, it was in his mind what had happened against Clare and Dublin coming down the stretch there where they didn't score for the final 20 minutes against Dublin. They ended up losing that by 1. They were 6 up. I think they scored 1 point in the final 20 minutes against Clare. They were also 6 up and lost that by 1. They were within 2 points of Cork in the league. So Unclear kicked a free in 48 minutes, and then it totally unravelled after that. And the best case of what good management is learning from that. So they were totally rootless at the weekend, making a change at midfield at half time for Colin Connor had a kind of a poor wide right in front of his goal, and he was pulled. Gavin Cooney started both of those games. He came on, kicked a great point on his left foot coming on the loop. And beyond that, the way they worked that final score, the clarity, talking about a team being on one page, that's a goalkeeper storming off the field. You watch Killian Ruan, from that moment on, it's runners from everywhere, and he finds himself in an ocean of space and taps over. I thought it was just great coaching. It's, again, another team that know exactly what they're about. Like they're very, very, very defensive, I have to say. They really do flood back kind of hyper aggressively, and Cork played into their hands. They did a thing that we would have seen 10 years ago, never really engaged that zone. First 10 minutes we're shooting from outside it. Fahey and O'Driscoll had 2 kind of bad wides from range that if you have a Jeremy Connolly and a Paul Flynn, that'll work to a certain extent, but I was surprised that Cork resorted to that. But from a Clare perspective, it's a massive result, and probably goes to show as well that for all the talk around what's happening across the board here, the margins are very fine here, Ger. Like, you go back to the league, I know they were relegated, but they had 2 very close results there, and now they finally get the rub of that on the flip side. So I think I saw something there this morning. I don't think Cork are in crisis either here, but I definitely do think from a Clare perspective, it was a massive result.
Should give a very quick mention, Maurice, to Armagh. I mean, it was a disappointing end of the season the league season for Kieran McGeeney in relegation, and they were disappointing in the last couple of games as well. But Conor Turbot was brilliant, I thought, in that weekend win against Antrim. And now it's a big Ulster quarter final against the Cavan, I think it is, on that side of the draw. So, I mean, I don't know where Armagh are at. It's hard to tell maybe after the weekend, but they certainly were impressive.
Yeah, I have to say, Shane, I think Armagh are in a fairly good spot. Watching a game like that at the weekend, I know the opposition taken into account and all that, but Armagh have no excuses, lads. Like, they have so much talent. Just watching Ben Creeley being back in midfield, the amount of turnovers, that guy has Mr. Gadget arms. He's just so good at getting a hand in and turning over the ball. He's a great kick-out option they have there. You mentioned Conor Turbot. He's an electric footballer. He's kind of 8 points. That's without, you flash to the stand, you see Rian O'Neill and Andrew Mernon up there. No Jaleo Burns. Kieran Mackin I think he could be a very special footballer. He only made his debut last year, but when you've a guy doing as much damage as he's doing, it was interesting. They seem to be taking on water all sides, but Andy Mackey, the first thing he does after 20 minutes is pull their wing forward and send somebody onto that wing to try and curtail his influence. I think they're moving in the right direction. Probably would have been critical enough for the way they set up at times in the league, but they kicked enough ball at the weekends. Again, opposition aside, but if they stick to that, what I'm saying is, I think in terms of on paper anyway, they're in a very good spot. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be in an Ulster final.
All right, we'll leave it there. Maurice, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Thanks, lads.
It's Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiner. Give us some thoughts on the weekend's football. And as I said, we'll obviously be talking about anything that we didn't cover there. So hold your wish giving out to us about not getting to your team. We do love you just as much as everybody else. Don't worry.